Yo, Brandon.
What's up, Peter? How are you doing?
Mate, I'm good. I'm looking forward to conference.
Same. They're dripping out a lot of little hints over there, making it sound like it's going to be a big deal this year.
Yeah, I heard they've got a big headline guest.
Yeah, I don't know who it could be.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to get the interview, which is fucking bullshit. Donald Trump in Nashville at the Bitcoin conference. How fucking weird is that?
Dude, in what, 1 year, how fast the politics have changed around this thing? And in my opinion, forget all the topical stuff, this week's news, that last week's news. I think the takeaway here is that we, as a cohort, matter now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people are saying, oh, he's just saying this or that to buy your votes. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. We're big enough to matter now. We're in the arena. This is the game. And that means they have to take us seriously and we can throw our weight around. And this was inevitable as well. Right. If we ever thought nation states were going to jump in, it was going to happen like this.
Yeah. The truth is, we had an election, I think it was last week. I didn't even vote. I forgot about it on the morning. I didn't vote. I didn't care. If I had a vote, I would have just drawn a dick on my ballot. I have no interest in either party. And if one of them had come out and said, look, we think there's a problem with the money and we're pro Bitcoin, that would have piqued my interest. Outside of that, I'm like, I'm just going to build shit around whatever bullshit you lot do.
Is that common in the UK right now? A bit of an apathy or?
Yeah, a lot of apathy. Yeah. There's a lot of apathy. We're probably going to get into it in this discussion because it's 2.5 years ago we last spoke. That feels a bit weird. Doesn't feel that long ago. Yeah.
No. Bitcoin time, COVID, you just throw 2 years out. Those disappeared.
Well, listen, anyone listening, if you haven't listened to me and Brandon before, we've twice made shows about the fourth turning, the Neil Strauss book, which he obviously has released a new version because the last time we covered what it is and what it might look like, and now he's saying we're here, we're in it.
That's right. And it was written in the 90s.
Yeah.
And he called a lot of things from that era, including 2020 being a big year. And yeah, crazy. And similar as The Sovereign Individual, which many of us know, published in the same year.
Yeah, I said Neil Strauss. It's Neil Howe.
It is Neil Howe.
Yeah, I said Neil Strauss. Neil Strauss, did he do he did the Motley Crue book?
I think that's right. And to your credit, he had a co-author, Bill Strauss, in his earlier books, who's now deceased. And so, yeah, you're close.
I'm allowed that one. Okay, let's remind people what the fourth turning is.
Yeah, so started through two historians, demographers, Neil Howe and William Strauss. They were writing books together in the 70s and 80s. Their first big hit was Generations. So again, looking back through history, what do we find if we look at these generations? And interestingly, they were not looking for cycles. Cycles emerged out of the research. And what they found is that throughout history, there are these long historical trends that continually repeat. The primary cycle they identified was roughly every 80 or 90 years. Society would go through a external crisis. Essentially, our institutions that hold society together, they start to decay. We stop trusting them, usually for good reason. And then as society starts to unwind, we become more volatile. Any little catalyst creates a huge outcome. And so essentially every 80 to 90 years in America, there's been either a total war externally or internally or some combination of the two. And so that's where we reimagine the exterior world. Think 1929 through 1945. So you have the stock market crash, Great Depression, World War II. During that period, social climate got very volatile, left versus right at each other's throats. We also decided willingly as a country to elect FDR, come off the gold standard, and do all kinds of stuff that was crazy just 10 years prior, like Social Security, FDIC. Later, we got NATO, World Bank, IMF, right? All these new post-world institutions that we take for granted as this is what the world order is like. That all happened. It was all built haphazardly at the last minute, all in that short period of time. And then we rode the wave of those institutions over time, young people came in, they didn't like the institutions, right? So midway through that 80 to 90 year cycle, we have an internal crisis. Historically, this is where all the religious movements are, going back to like the Quakers and other areas. Neil calls them the awakening. And at that period, we start to tear down internal culture. We redo the music, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So you essentially transition from Leave It to Beaver, 1950s white picket fences to this, like, the kids grow up and they want nothing to do with that culture. They burn it down. And that's the midway point of that 80 to 90 year cycle. And again, we're very deep right now in the current fourth turning, which mirrors the 1929 to 45 period. It started here in 2008. Neil thinks somewhere between 2030 and 2035 will wrap up. And so if we zoom out for a second, it's an 80, 90 year cycle. It's based on demographics. It's based on cohorted humans who are all born at the same time. And I think the key point here for why is this potentially relevant is because there's a symbiosis between cohorts of people. We'll call them generations. We're the millennial generation, Gen X, whatever. And we all grew up in this same time period. And so history imprinted a way of life on us. We all had the same assumptions. We all had 9/11. We had the '08 crash, et cetera. These things forged our generation into what we are. We grew up in a certain climate. Then when we grow up, again, we're forged in a certain way. Then we start to push back on the world. We start to change the world in a somewhat predictable way because we were all forged in the same manner. And there's also this period in human life where you go from you're a kid, you're with your parents, your identity is pretty much your parents. Then at some point you leave the nest, and what happens? You want to build an identity through your peer group. So mom and dad are stupid, my friends are smart, and you essentially go to college or university or whatever that coming of age period is, and you just immerse yourself with your peers, and then you just cement it right there, and that's your cultural identity as a cohort, and you grow up and you do the same. And so that symbiosis between culture and generations, or history and generations, repeats and repeats and repeats. Neil identified 4 archetypes. They go in a specific order. And the key point here is that it predicts a mood. It does not predict the future. It essentially says, what age are these different archetypes, right? Are the individualists in charge? Are the collectivists in charge? Right? All these different things. And based on that, you can predict the response to catalysts around you, right? So one good example is, I forgot the name of the boat, but essentially in World War I, the Lusitania ship was sunk and very easily could have been total war. But in that period, we were in a third turning, a period where we were not ready to take drastic action. No war. Pearl Harbor, war the next day, right? So a similar catalyst, but our response was different. So I just want to make sure people are aware that it's a response. It's not a prediction thing. And it's about a mood. It's a very big macro trend. And then one last point, and I'll get off my stump here. This is a bottom-up type observation and model, right? You can also look at a top-down model like the long-term debt cycle, popularized by Ray Dalio, that says, well, we're under too much debt, so we have to do something drastic. That plays very well in my mind with this bottom-up demographic human population cycle. And so I don't think either one is accurate in isolation. I think they both have a role to play. And so I would consider this a tool for your toolbox for any listeners. It's just another way to view the world. It's another way to try to more accurately model what's in front of us.
Yeah, it's funny because when we were touching on this, I think the first time, I can't remember, it was during COVID. I think it might have been during COVID. It was like, yeah, everything's starting to feel like it's getting a bit weird. And now, 3 years after, it's like, no, everything feels fucked. Everything, honestly, everything. It's like I have so much apathy for politics. I would say I'm prepping a little, just a little. Just trying to prepare for weird scenarios. And I haven't put all-out nuclear war off the table just yet. Which isn't good, man.
It's honestly crazy to say. I totally agree. And if I can give a quick backstory here, just related to that. In 2020, I got married. I flew the whole family to Costa Rica in February of 2020. okay, Bitcoiners were on COVID early on Twitter. We're all talking about it. All my normie friends are like, you're crazy. And I almost canceled our whole wedding. I'm thinking in my head, I'm going to fly everyone I love to Costa Rica, and we're going to get stuck here during this horrible pandemic.
Pretty cool place to get stuck with your whole family for a year.
Yeah, worst case scenario, we're on the beach surfing, eating coconuts. All went well. We got home, mid-March, NBA shuts down, everything's done. I go into a frenzy. I'm locked inside. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. The world's going crazy. And I was honestly quite manic. I'm reading all these books. I was not pleasant to be around. Also, it's winter in Minnesota, so I'm just locked in fluorescent lights, reading. Came across the Fourth Turning book, and pieces started to make sense. I'm like, okay, if I view it through this lens, it's not as crazy. It's not illogical what I'm seeing. Like, why is my neighbor calling the cops on my other neighbor because there's an extra car in the driveway for a holiday? Like, that was scaring me. Why are my friends, who I would assume have a spine and who I assume would not go along with some of this stuff, we're just all following in line, right? And so then you start to look at this thesis, and you realize that during these fourth turnings, the collective understanding as a group is that we need to do some radical change. What we were doing before wasn't working. We don't trust the institutions. That's at an all-time low right now, which is obvious. You can feel that. But when you have this collective understanding that it's not working and that we really do want some order, we demand that order, then all of a sudden people are willing to do previously crazy things because the ends justify the means, right? You start to look downstream of that collective impulse, and things like populism, cancel culture, war in general, all these things start to be on the table because the stakes are higher and we feel that change needs to occur.
Yeah, I kind of half fell for a lot of the COVID stuff. I thought, yeah, these lockdowns make sense. Made sense to me. Yeah, this vaccination makes sense.
You caught a lot of heat for that one.
Yeah, well, but I mean, look, we're a lot more collectivist in the UK anyway. We don't really, it's. I don't know why. I don't know why it is. I think it's perhaps we don't have like freedom ingrained in a constitution the way Americans do. So we don't think about it in that way. We are very and do you know, it's funny, I was chatting to Breedlove when he came over to the UK. It's like, oh, it's really nice here. Everyone's just really nice and civilized. I was like, yeah, we just kind of all agree to do things together. And then, that group who are a bit different, they're the radicals, and we forget about them. But even like I, about halfway through, started thinking, hold on, there's something quite not right here. Can I get that jab out of me?
Yeah, if you look at the selection bias, right, the waves of immigration to America, who came over? It wasn't the go along to get along community guy who doesn't take risk. No, America was seeded with all the renegades, cowboys, risk takers, also crazy religious people. Crazy is probably not fair. People who seek a different religious path. So if you forge a country on that and you build your identity around that, no surprise that it's diverged from Europe.
Yeah. Well, you had to kick our asses out as well.
That's right. Tax on this tea, no thank you.
Yeah, fucking 2%. You wish that was your only tax now, mate. A little 2% on the tea. Okay, so you've gone back to the book. Neil Howe's written this updated version. He's like, Bosh, we're here, we're in it now. Why? What's he saying?
Yeah, I think, in my honest opinion, the book is probably 70%, maybe 80% rehashing the original ideas, just with a little more meat on the bones, a little more confidence. And then he does go through systematically examining different areas that we're in right now. And he gives a much more detailed view of where we are and where we're looking to go in the future. I don't think much of it was surprising to me. And I found a lot of it just to be a refresh. And, if Neil's just trying to monetize his brand, his ideas, I support that. I would do the same thing if I was him. I don't think he would agree with what I'm saying, but that was the feeling I got. And some feedback from friends who read the book said something similar.
But also at the same time, did you really need to read it? I mean, the other than new 30%, you're like, well, yeah, no, that's exactly what I'm feeling. Was it more kind of reaffirming how you felt?
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, there wasn't much that surprised me in the book, to your point. I was so steeped in the idea that sometimes I don't remember if it's my idea or his idea when I'm listening to his book. Because I do feel like I internalize his lens quite well. But the one area we disagree is Neil is a boomer DC Democrat establishment, like old school Democrat establishment kind of guy. And so we recorded a podcast on Swan Salon, me, Neil, and Sam Callahan as sort of the moderator. And we went back and forth on Bitcoin and the model and whatnot. But I think our primary divergence was he strongly believes that going forward, society does need this like global order. We do need a way to like have a circuit breaker on the money. We have to have a way that the politicians can control the money in a way. So he would line up more towards like a CBDC type thing being he would assume that type of control is required for a modern society. Whereas I think the Bitcoin lens, which obviously I come from, is more of we can put the money as a public good. We can take the money out of the state. The money can serve as a neutral protocol to move value around the world, similar to the internet protocol. And that actually is a world where we trust each other more, or we can maybe a better way to say it is we can collaborate better without needing to trust the tiny group of people that runs the money. I'd say that's probably our primary divergence.
Do you think that goes back to your point about generationally where you're at and therefore the mood you have?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Which is funny. He's making an argument that it's very ironic, right? Neil is essentially saying, I'm a boomer and I can't see the future you're painting. But by definition, in his own theory, the young people bring in things that the old people can't understand. And so in a way, it was like a poetic, he gave a point for our side on accident in a poetic way there.
But is that because the boomers got all the money, all the assets, all the property, and then maybe the millennials and the Gen Zs, certainly, I mean, look, I've been through the process with my son. He wants to buy a house and it's so far out of reach for him. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like when I bought a house, I could afford a mortgage. I just couldn't afford the deposit because I had no savings, right? So my dad, I remember my dad, he lent me £5,000 deposit. The house was £100,000. And then he lent me £5,000 for furniture. And I think I'd paid him back within a year. And I could afford it. We've been through a similar thing with my son. It's like, not only can he not afford the deposit and the furniture, he still can't afford the mortgage afterwards. And I mean, that first house I bought, that was like 20 years ago. That was £100,000. It's like £250,000 now. And so it's just not feasible. And so I have to help him to a point where he won't even be able to pay me back for a long time. So these scenarios are quite different. And so, and Connor, and Connor, him and his friends, as a cohort and probably other similar kids, I think they're all feeling the same. And we've all seen these TikTok videos of like kids are crying, and I say they're kids, but they're young adults, and they're like, I'm working 2 jobs and I can't make rent, and I'm broke, and I don't get to have any fun. And so I think that's an entirely different mood that they're experiencing.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, young people have no hope. They have no positive outlook on the future. They believe that the world given to them doesn't work in the future. And that's not a great place to be. Number one, we cannot have a country where young people are not idealistic and optimistic to a fault, right? They should be overly optimistic. We're going to change the world. Before the world, sort of beats them down and makes them a little more jaded, they need that unbridled optimism. And so we do need to get that back. And the fact that they don't feel that today, it creates some sort of nihilistic feeling that just pervades young people. And you could say it kind of pops out in culture in negative ways. I think that's probably a fair argument. But I think the key point tying it to the fourth turning is if that's the environment you're in, young people are willing to do crazy, crazy things in order to get us out of this thing. And the comparison is in the 1930s. It's the previous fourth turning. It is a shocking comparison. In that period, communism and fascism were rising in America. Okay, liberal Western democracy, capitalism, the values we hold dear, let's say in the West, they were all being questioned during that period. And the left and the right were at each other's throats, similar to now. And again, obviously this was on the back of 1929. But what did the government do? FDR comes in, mega government. We introduce deficit spending for the first time. People are demanding order. We just got rug pulled. We demand the government to do something. And that's what young people are doing today, right? So think about FDR. Social Security, unemployment insurance, okay? FDIC. These are guarantees by the federal government to say, hey, I know life's kind of crazy right now and whatever. We're going to step in and help you. And young people are screaming, yes, yes, yes. Taxes went from 24% to 63%. They were blaming the rich for everything. They called it soak the rich. Now we're eating the rich. Same patterns are reemerging here, right?
It's like the billionaires shouldn't exist.
Exactly. Yeah, if you're not with us, you're against us. Climate, young people have like climate disorder. They just sports bet. No point saving. How am I supposed? I can't buy a house anyways, so whatever. And Neil strongly believes that the young people are going to create sort of a communitarian outlook of the future. So I don't know if it's communal housing or what it is, but it's going to be something radically different that boomers who are individualistic, Xers who are very individualistic, they're not going to like the future that Neil sees coming out of millennials and younger.
Well, you say that, but they can monetize it as well. Let me tell you this interesting story. So I was looking at buying this property in Bedford, leasing this property. I wanted to open up a cafe, right? And this property I found was super cool. And when I reached out to the landlord, they said, well, actually, we'd be interested in selling it. I was like, okay, cool. Let me know the price. They said, the thing is, we've got a HMO upstairs. I think it's called a HMO. Or is that the US thing? Anyway, it's like, I'm pretty sure it's called a HMO. Above the shop front is this shared property whereby it's like a multi-person occupancy. So it's a bit like dorms. So you get your own room, and your own room is like a bedroom and a settee. It's almost like a hotel room, really. And then you have like shared kitchens and shared bathrooms. And I found out these are really growing. There's more and more of these propping up because that's the only way some people can afford to have their own place, in that rather than getting a house or even an apartment, they get in a room with like shared services. And it's the boomers who are creating these. They are monetizing it because people cannot get on the housing ladder, and they cannot afford to rent. I mean, in Bedford alone, right, you can't really rent somewhere under £800 a month. I mean, that's quite, if you add in your bills and if you add in your council taxes and all the other taxes you got to pay, you have to be breaking 25K a year to just be able to rent a one-bed apartment. And that's been a drastic change in a very short amount of time. And so you say we won't like it, but in some ways this is being forced. I think it's almost the boomers are forcing this onto, or the people who hold the assets are forcing it onto the young people because that's all they can afford.
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually argue with my dad about this one a few times, where younger idealistic Brandon would say, Dad, your generation had it on easy street. You had the easiest economic tailwinds in the history of time. Your generation has nothing to complain about. And he would come back and say, well, then why are half my friends still working? Right? He's retirement age, American dream. They should all be retired. And I started digging into the data a little bit. And although the boomers as a generation still own the largest amount of wealth for any generation, I think it's around 30 or 33% or something. The median boomer has less than 500K in savings. So the median boomer they're not going to be able to finish their medical bills without serious problems, right? And so even though the generation has all the wealth, it's hyper concentrated at the top, even there. And so to your point, the boomers are going to need to figure out a retirement strategy that's extremely low cost, half of them at least. And that's where you're seeing the rise of things like trailer park homes in the US. If you go to Arizona, if you go to like middle America, Missouri, Kansas, etc., they have enormous plots of lands purchased. So let's say I buy 100 acres, 10 acres or whatever, and I split it into these tiny little RV parks. And then the boomers all go down there and then they play pickleball and they line dance and they go hiking together and whatever. And so I agree, the boomers will drive that aspect. but they view it as like we're celebrating and we're going to go be individuals and do our own thing instead of moving where their grandchildren live, which I think is the norm historically, and I think is better for them and better for the grandchildren and their children. Maybe I'm speaking for my own benefit here.
Did you see that film Nomadland?
I watched maybe half of it. I got bored, to be honest. But that's a good example. That's the low end.
That was because that was kind of like a trailer parky kind of existence, and they were all hanging out by the fire. And
yep. And I would say that's not what I'm necessarily describing. That's the really low end economically. If you want to get by as a misfit with no money and you can't even afford the RV in the RV park, you end up in one of those type of communities. But I think it told this story that a lot of people are feeling. One more data point, Adam Newman, WeWork, right? He raised a bunch of money to create that co-working, co-living business. I forgot what it was. He raised billions of dollars to essentially make like a WeWork with a bunk bed inside.
Hold on, let's look it up. Yeah, I was surprised he was able to raise money again. Right. Flow.
Exactly. Yeah, Flow.
Yeah, he raised $350 million from Andreessen Horowitz to launch yet another real estate company, Flow. That's fascinating.
There you go.
And so, what is that? Hold on, I've got to look this up. So it's a co-living, co-working space. It's on Wikipedia. A real estate company. Flow is an American residential real estate company founded in 2022 by Adam Newman. Hopes to address some aspects of United States housing shortage through technology, providing equity for renters and a new type of social interaction. Something smells rough about it. It's like we're constantly trying to squeeze something out for the bottom end. I understand that point though of, when people talk about a wealth tax. I was talking about this to Danny, and I don't agree with it. I 100% disagree with wealth taxes, but I can see why other people are fans of them. And I think there would be even more, bigger supporters of them if they truly understood inflation and how all those with the assets who they're looking to tax benefited from inflation. And so that rise, you say, of like fascism and communism, and especially seeing it through the universities, it's definitely something I've recognized. Sadly, fuck. How do we get there?
Yeah, it's totally normal, that impulse, right? Yeah. But it's obviously not well thought through. It's a lizard brain reaction. And in my opinion, it's been happening since we have history books, right? There's periods where inequality is high and young people rise up. You can name tons of these examples. But obviously that's not the right approach, right? And so how do we navigate our impulses, which are wrong, even though the feelings are real and like, yeah, okay, you're mad, but that doesn't actually solve anything. And I think Bitcoin actually plugs in here nicely because we start talking about this outside tool that sort of changes the dynamic with capital and the haves and the have-nots, because it prevents the wealthy people from capturing the money, right? And that in a way creates a money game, an economic game that's more fair. And so historically in fourth turnings, the rules change. And even before fourth turnings, wealthy people have always gotten close to the money printer and changed laws or built a moat around themselves, or they were in the know before everyone else so they could navigate the changes more effectively. But I think in a Bitcoin world, it makes as fair of a game as possible. And that's as much as we can ask for, right? If you look at old school American values, that's all it was. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We try to make the game fair and merit rises to the top. And that's a world we want to see. We want to see merit compounding over and over and over again. Whereas the modern left wants to say, let's make everything fair. Let's make sure the outcomes are entirely fair. It's this weird protectionism. Let's put a tariff on everything. Let's, whatever you're trying to remove all advantages and make everyone get the same outcome. And what does that do? That compounds mediocrity. It rewards the wrong thing. And if you do that for a couple of generations, what are you doing? You're disincentivizing all the productive people in society. And the cold hard facts is the small minority of people who shoot the moon and create value and bring products to market and change the world, those folks create an enormous amount of value that spills over into the rest of society. And so it does create very, very perverse incentives for a country. And my fear right now is we're barreling down this path. And historically, all previous fourth turnings in the last few hundred years, we've always flirted with authoritarianism in some format. And Neil frames it as every time we do this, we reinvent America in a new republic. And so essentially, a way to think about this is we're fighting over the fourth American republic. And each time it's slightly different. The question might be, how much of OG America values are we gonna return to, or are we gonna venture out into some new social contract? But either way, we're going to the brink of collapse or failure here, and hopefully we come out on top. But it's a natural process that's required. It's a cyclical thing, and there's cycles everywhere. So we should accept the fact that this is a brush fire to clear out the forest, and new growth will come on the back end. But at the same time, decisions we make right now at the last minute, they're going to define the next 80, 90, 100 years. And so nihilism is not the path. Apathy is not the path. We should be as bright-eyed and bushy-tailed trying to get a hold of this thing as we can. And the statistics do show during fourth turnings that voter turnout explodes, civic engagement explodes. So you might feel apathy, but the numbers across the population is actually the opposite. If you look at culture today, the left thinks that Trump is going to end democracy. The right thinks that Biden is going to end the democracy. And so there's this very funny situation where both sides are digging their heels in, and they believe the other side is going to destroy everything we have. And that type of psychological condition is really hard to come back from. And so I don't know how this looks, but when I think about where does this fourth turning climax, and there always is a climax, the last one was World War II. This one feels a little bit scarier in two parts. One, because we're starting with an enormous debt load. There was no federal debt in the 30s. They could create all these crazy money printing social programs with very little consequence relatively. Today, we do a couple of stimmy checks and inflation goes off the rails and people can't eat, right? And so we have a very, very thin margin to spend here to help grease the wheels. And so what does that lead? It leads to desperation. And I think war is a very convenient way to inflate away the debt. And so you rally the troops. Hey, we got to go rally against this enemy, and your life's at ruin. So forget inflation. We're printing money to save your existence, and people fall in line. And so I think the conditions for war become more favorable to people in power. Simultaneously, the internal strife in America is very scary, right? There's a world where America has some sort of internal conflict. The rest of the world views us as weak, and China moves in Taiwan while we're distracted burning our own cities down, right? What is the reaction to that type of thing? And so I don't actually have a strong opinion if it's going to be an external war, internal war. Right. I just see the conditions are ripe and you light the wrong match and it cascades into something pretty scary.
Yeah, well, look, firstly, voter turnout in the UK was the lowest since 2001, so lowest in 23 years, 60%. So I think the apathy is there at the moment, because I think it needs to get worse for people to be angry enough to come out and vote. I think the US might be slightly different because there's such a divide. It's like, I must vote for Biden. I must stop Trump getting in. Or it's, I must vote for Trump because Biden's terrible and the Dems have been terrible. I think there's a lot more engagement in the US with politics right now. But yeah, no, there's certainly apathy here at the moment. But we also, another reason we have apathy is we don't have particularly strong leaders. I mean, our Conservative Party have been terrible. They've gone right to the center. Labour Party. They're very much a centre left Labour Party at the moment. So I just don't think people feel like they've got anyone to vote for, anyone to get behind. Also, just as a side point, we'll get into war. Have you been following what's happening in Norway?
I have not.
Okay, so here's a headline for you. Wealthy Norwegians flee to Switzerland to evade high wealth taxes, with bankers following. So steep increases in wealth and dividend taxes by Norway's left-leaning government have prompted dozens of Nordic nations rich to move to another prosperous, mountainous country to the south. The bankers have Switzerland on their sights too. So listen to this number: 82 rich Norwegians with a combined net wealth of 46 billion kroner, so $4.3 billion, left in 22-23, with 34 moving out last year alone. And so there's been I want to know the stats. Somebody told me something crazy, like this new wealth tax was set to raise, I'm going to make these numbers up, but say 150 million, but they ended up losing more than that by the wealthy people leaving. And so in some of these places, I think they've been pushing these wealth taxes just a bit too hard.
Yeah, that's a funny irony, isn't it? You try to snipe their wealth, and then you realize that, well, they can just leave. So net negative.
Yeah.
And honestly, the unintended consequences are the scary part about fourth turnings, because there is a will to take drastic action, but it's also last minute and haphazard and emotional, right? If we're going to make large changes in any organization or your personal life, doesn't matter. You want to make those decisions when you're in a calm, clear state of mind. You're feeling, emotionally grounded. You're thinking long term. You got a good night's sleep. You just worked out. Now you're going to make a good decision, right? No. Fourth turnings, it's like you're on a 3-day bender and you realize that, the worst thing imaginable is about to happen, and you got to make a decision with one eye open in a hotel room in Vegas. Like, that's the decision-making environment we're in right now. And that leads to making a decision like tax the wealthy too much, and then they all leave, and then your country collapses, right? Or some other crazy thing. I saw something in France, a similar thing. I don't know the relevancy of this, but the left-wing party wants some sort of a 90% tax above 400K or something, and like control food, housing, lower retirement age to 60. Yeah. Like, this is a crazy list here.
Yeah, well, so I don't know if you know what happened there, but I think her name's Maria Le Pen. Her party, there's been over the last kind of decade, 2 decades, the right, and you would consider maybe more on the far right, and I don't mean that as a pejorative, just more on the far right, have been growing and growing in popularity in France. And Maria Le Pen herself has been growing in popularity. Again, somebody listening might know this more than me because I haven't followed it directly. I don't even know if she was up for election. But what I do know is the way their elections run is that there was a chance this kind of far right party would win. And so the only way they got defeated, there was like a coalition between various parties, which had to include this far left party. And so, yeah, they've been talking about these like crazy wealth taxes, crazy 90% taxes, but also there's like counter stories coming out where they're talking about how so many of the rich are starting to consider leaving France. Where can they go? And they'll go to Switzerland. It's a border nation, right? Switzerland borders France. So they're probably all going to be heading off to Geneva. But yeah, I mean, look, French left faces here you go. The French left faces a reality check over 90% wealth tax and lavish spending. Here you go. France's left-wing coalition could break French and EU law with its proposed radical program for government that includes a 90% tax on the rich and a series of high-spending policies. Here you go. The new Popular Front. Sounds awful, though. The new Popular Front won the most seats in the parliamentary elections on Sunday, ahead of Emmanuel Macron's Ensemble Alliance. The far-right National Rally, which came top in the first round, fell to third. Yeah, so in the first round of voting, this far-right party had come first. So it's only by a coalition they stopped them winning. But anyway, so yeah, they're talking about all these crazy. Yeah, the left insists this is affordable, financed through a 90% wealth tax on annual income above 400,000. It's like, if you earn above 400,000, you're gonna be like, fuck off to this. You're gonna get the hell out of France. because it's not. It's like it's morally unethical to be taxed anywhere near that rate. I mean, I know some people listen to it, it's morally unethical to tax any amount. But yeah, crazy shit. It's weird because the UK and France have swung to the left, but large parts of Europe are swinging hard right as well. And it feels like it's these hard extremes, but that's another fourth turn inside, right?
Yeah, exactly right. And I think to the exact point in France, you're forging an unholy alliance that you never thought you would do because you're desperate and because the ends justify the means, right? Like let's take Biden for example. Let's say I'm a establishment Democrat. I'm a never Trumper. I'm a Biden vote blue all the way. Whatever you want to call this mass. Okay. They somehow somewhere made a decision that they're going to try and convince the US population that we don't have a grandpa with dementia as our candidate. They were trying to hide that from everyone and they thought they could just sneak it by. And why did they do that? Well, they believe that this is better than Trump. And so they're essentially saying we have to save democracy. How are we going to do it? By controlling democracy and creating a secret cabal to push our. What are we talking about here? We got to save democracy by creating an authoritarian shadow government to enact our will so then later we can give democracy back. Like these are crazy, crazy thoughts. And I think it's logical in a fourth turning condition. If you think the other side is literally existential, you're willing to do some crazy things, whether it's partner with the far left in France or prop up Weekend at Bernie's, like clown world.
Dude, this Biden thing is ridiculous. I can't believe they can't find somebody who's a better candidate. Did you see the stuff yesterday where he called Zelensky Putin?
I did. I saw the clip, yeah.
And then he called Kamala Harris Trump. I mean, it's almost like every time he opens his mouth, something bad's coming out. And it's also, it feels cruel. I mean, this guy should be in a home, hanging out with his grandkids.
I agree. Did you see post-presidential debate when Trump walked off stage? Biden just sort of stood at the podium for a couple minutes. His wife, Jill Biden, comes and like walks him up to the CNN booth. And then she goes to the, I don't know if it was a studio audience or who those people were in the audience, but she grabs the mic. She's in charge. He's just an old guy on the side. And she's like, Joe, you did such a good job. You knew all the questions and you knew the answers and you didn't lie. And what did Trump do? He lied. And it was just the most pathetic, embarrassing thing I've ever seen in the country. And immediately after, all the CNN, MSNBC, all the post game, all the establishment left folks did a 180 overnight. And it felt like a weird coup type situation. And what's funny is later that night, I was just like, had a weird taste in my mouth, like one of the weirdest things I've ever seen in TV. And I think it was Willie Woo, actually, who posted a video of, who was it? It was FDR and Nixon, maybe. Essentially, we just watched the two oldest presidents in the history debate. And then I watched a YouTube video of the two youngest. They're respectful. They're both super sharp. Hey, I agree with the gentleman here in these three areas, but I would implore the American people to explore our difference in this category and see what feels right for you, instead of like calling each other fat and telling each other that they're bad at golf. Man.
Yeah, well, actually, I also saw the one. So people started posting the presidential debate more recently, the one between Mitt Romney and Obama. And again, that was very respectful. That was a good debate. And you, I don't know, man. It's strange times. Like how can these Democrats not actually realize that people aren't going to vote for Biden because they realize that it's almost exposing what's behind the veil, that they aren't. You don't have a president there. You don't have someone in control. Surely that's higher risk. Surely they can find a candidate now that is more votable than Biden.
Yeah, I don't pretend to know the inner workings and how they could or couldn't pull it off, but it does feel like they're backed into a corner right now. In my opinion, going back to my previous point, I think they thought they could pull it off. I think they believe they could trick us once again, and I think it's blowing up in their face. And to be honest, I think they deserve to lose, and it deserves to be embarrassing, and they deserve to have a major shakeup over there. They totally fumbled the bag, and they can't get their Bitcoin policy right. And of course, Trump opportunistically swoops in and buys us all as voters, and that's the game. And
but dementia gets progressively worse, right? I mean, 4 years ago, you could kind of get away with it. It was the odd slip up, a little stumble.
Right.
I mean, he's had 4 more years of getting progressively more ill.
That's right. And they were hiding it prior, to your point. Yeah. And he didn't do much public stuff, but there's no choice now. And as soon as I saw the talking heads on the left flip, now they're going to be calling it out. And so the left side in the US, they can't believe anymore that it was just the trolls, the internet trolls forging the videos, right? Because your own people are telling you what's right in front of you. And what's Orwell's quote? It's like, the biggest lie the party ever told you is to not believe what you see, or something like that.
Yeah. Do not believe your own eyes. I'm going to look it up.
Yeah, something like that. That's kind of what it feels like is going on right now.
Here you go. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. Oh, fuck. Has there, let's go back to the war thing. Has there ever been fourth turnings that have ended without war? Please.
No, unfortunately not. Fuck. It went World War II. It went the Civil War, the Revolutionary War. Can't remember if Neil did one prior to that, but yeah, it's been a very serious total war every single time. But I want to be super clear that it doesn't mean, I'm not saying I'm calling a war. A war is required. I'm not saying that. What is required is a catalyst large enough to get the whole population, or a large chunk of the population, to make dramatic changes. War is probably the best example of that. And it kills 2 birds with 1 stone. It knocks out the debt problem, and it gets us all to march in one direction to make mega changes. It also leads to forging weird alliances. It leads to change, and then we sort of rebuild with what's left over. And so I don't see a world where we don't enter some serious conflict in the next 5-10 years. I think it's possible that we don't, but if I'm betting, that's what I'm betting on. Now, what does it look like? Honestly, I don't know. It could be external war, internal war, a mix of both. It's really not clear to me where we shake up.
Yeah, because obviously the Russia-Ukraine situation is the flashpoint right now, and the flashpoint isn't the fear isn't that war in itself, as terrible as it is. It's that war expanding. The growing rhetoric between Putin and NATO. It almost feels like they keep prodding each other just a little bit harder to see how far they can push each other, and you don't know, when that will spill over to something more extreme. It scares the fucking shit out of me. But I try and I don't know if you've done the various kind of thought ideas, and I do wonder, coming into this with both AI and Bitcoin, could that itself be a catalyst for change? Could, for example, massive growth in AI over the next 5 years disrupt the jobs market so much that we have some other kind of catalyst for change? Have you done any kind of thought experiments like this?
Yeah, I've thought about that a little bit, and I think that is a pressure release valve if we have proper economic growth. And I think that there's a world where, I guess it depends how we value AI. Is AI a 100x thing that society radically shifts in the next 10 years? We have insane real productivity, real GDP growth, real wage growth, et cetera. If that's true, it would take a lot of the pressure off. And so I think we could shoot the moon with something like AI plus Bitcoin, and we just really, really, really provide value. I think it's possible. I wouldn't give it a very high likelihood, but I would say we want to vote. We want to root for that outcome no matter what, because what we can control is a pro-growth agenda, and I think that's the best thing we can do. If we have this sort of flat, trickling by, barely moving economy in the West, it just means that our debt will continually be more of a burden, and we'll have to do something about it. And so, yeah, let's go pro-growth. let's have babies. Let's deregulate AI. Let's allow Bitcoin, the broader technology landscape, to be as unencumbered as humanly possible. Let it flourish in the West. If we go down that path, I think at a minimum, it helps reduce the conflict risk. In the best case scenario, maybe it eliminates it. But I don't have a lot of optimism there. I sadly, by the way, I don't want to go live in the mountains and build a bunker, but I'm not going to lie and say I don't think about that and I don't take steps towards that direction right now. Honestly, it feels prudent, right? 20 years ago, being a prepper was like a funny, weird subculture that you could make fun of with reality TV. Today, the best and brightest I know are all prepping, 100% of them. And all the billionaires have bunkers, right? That's the meme. And I think it's rational to take steps that direction if you can.
Yeah, but the ones who are going to Hawaii, I'm not sure about that one. I think Hawaii could get bombed pretty early. I think someone's going to New Zealand have got it right. I think Peter Thiel
on your attack vectors.
Yeah, right? I think Peter Thiel's got one in New Zealand. It's funny.
Everyone's got one in New Zealand, yeah.
I started looking at bunkers. I swear to God, if any of my friends listen to this episode, they're like, "What's happened to He's turned into a nutter." I started looking at bunkers just because they're fucking cool.
They are cool.
The stuff you can build under your house is pretty cool. The funny thing is, when you look at the blast radius for a nuclear attack in London, Bedford's right on the rim of the blast radius.
Oh no! So if London goes, Bedford goes.
I don't know. I don't know if we just get the fallout. I just don't know. There's a lady on the latest Rogan show talking about the reality of a nuclear war and what would happen, and she just maps out the scenarios of how it happened, and the nuclear conflict would last 72 minutes. Yeah, it's a 72-minute war, and 5 billion people killed, and then nuclear winter to follow. It's like, fuck, man, this sucks.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of potential risks here, like the pole shifting, and we have like our magnetic shield and the Earth goes down, and then solar activity is more impactful and our grid goes down, or we go through the Taurid meteor stream and we run into a rock flowing through space like we've done many times throughout history. Right? There's a whole bunch of things that you might want a bunker for.
And I'm just giggling about it. But it's like that. It's like, there's like a term for this kind of laughing where you're laughing at bad things. I can't remember what it is. Somebody told me recently. All right, come on, let's go a bit more positive. Okay. So if you go back to previous fourth turnings, you did say they weren't always in times of economic crisis. And so we do have an economic crisis now, but parallel to the economic crisis, we do have this kind of Bitcoin prosperity that's building. And so could it be that there's enough transfer of wealth into Bitcoin that would create this new parallel prosperous economy where the allocators of capital are the Bitcoiners who come with their principles and their Bitcoin capital, and we rebuild an economy and we create growth through that.
Yeah,
hopefully.
Yeah, I'm very. If I'm optimistic about anything, it's what you just described. Let's try and break it down. So, in my mind, the two primary forces or primary needs that need to be met in this next stage is we have to figure out what we're doing with the debt. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse. Lynn Alden always tweets like, "Nothing stops this train." She cracks me up. And so, number one is what are we doing with the debt? Number two is the social mood, the climate, the needs that need to be met are order. So society demands order. And if we go back to the high level macro view of this thesis, there's a supply of order and there's a demand of order. And those things fluctuate based on the which turning we're in. The one we're in right now is we have no order. So supply is at an all-time low. Demand is now reaching an all-time high. And so that mismatch is what creates this insatiable desire to collectivize and to make radical change because we really need the order. Well, if we look at Bitcoin, I think it's easy to argue that Bitcoin solves both of these two things, right? So on the debt side, Bitcoin is just an alternative to rebase the currency on a macro level. Individuals can just opt out locally. So all of a sudden at an individual level, you're not going down with the ship. And if we just slowly siphon people over to a Bitcoin system, or gradually and suddenly is more likely, as people move over there, their individual pain goes down, their individual desperation goes down. And that's like a pressure release valve for this pain. And so that's a pretty optimistic view, right? Individuals can opt into a system. Small countries like El Salvador can leapfrog other countries by taking a risk early on. I foresee a bunch more of that. And so I think the debt will still be a problem, but we at least have this like way to shuffle out. On the order side, right? So we need to think about what creates more fair conditions. We need to think about what will unite society in a way where we can trust the outcomes and trust the system. And I think Bitcoin, properly understood, is a new type of institution. It's an internet native institution. It is a decentralized by design institution. It doesn't matter what political flavor you come from. There's something in Bitcoin for you. And I think it's emerging at the perfect time, right? I call Bitcoin a fourth turning money. It was born Bitcoin was born in 08, 09 during the global financial crisis. The idea was forged in the 90s and 2000s and even earlier as the forward-thinking cypherpunks and others were starting to observe what happens in this internet native world. And so it emerged out of this pain we're in now. And I think it would be quite poetic if Bitcoin steps into that role over the next decade here in a large way. And I think we're on track for that. I think it will also create like a transfer of wealth thing that we really, really, really need. Young people need a share of the future. They need to feel like they have a stake in the future. And the math still shows that young people buy Bitcoin at a higher rate than older people, even though the older people have more money. And so it sort of helps move the wealth. It potentially helps with the debt. It allows us to get rid of central bank type folks. Like their influence will go way down and we'll trust this new system. And so I could very much see a new America, a new West built around a money that is neutral. And this money allows anyone the same opportunity. So all the progressives, they can find their values there. All the right-leaning folks, they can find their values there. And all of a sudden, we don't necessarily have to get along because we know the money's good and we know for sure that you guys aren't cheating with the government to get money for you guys and we're not cheating vice versa. So it essentially builds a bridge for both sides. And to me, that results in a growing middle class. And that is what we need. It will probably, the downstream effects are enormous. And you might say, well, that sounds kind of abstract. How could a money change culture? And I would point to the existing folks who surround themselves with this Bitcoin thing. And it's pretty clear that people's lives change. I think the impact will be reduced on marginal new adopters in the future because they're not going to go all in. They're not going to go to conferences. They're not going to be these crazy Bitcoin people. But the closer you get to this thing, the more it changes you. Mm-hmm. And so if we take that as some sort of evidence, and I think it's fair to assume that at least on a small bit, all of society will change interacting with a different type of money, a money that incentivizes savings over consumption. That changes you, right? A money that empowers you to feel safe about the future, a money that you can trust that you're in charge. It teaches you this sort of self-sovereignty type thing, and that spills over in other areas of life. You start having kids, you start thinking a little bit more critically, you're not on this hamster wheel. And I think society is best historically when we're thinking long-term, when we have goals above ourselves, bigger than ourselves that we can latch onto. That is when we rise to the occasion. And this is true in my own personal life. If I'm just home alone, wife and kids are gone, whatever, I'm not as long-term thinking. I'm not the best version of myself compared to when I have responsibility on my back. And so I think that principle applies broadly. And so, Bitcoin plays a role here. That's the takeaway there.
All right, and if it doesn't, I'm coming to Minnesota because I think it's going to be a bit safer there than Bedford.
What I would say is some people would say that this is like doom porn or astrology for intellectuals or critiques like this. And honestly, I thought the same thing when I was reading through it the first time. But I think the critique falls flat because it's kind of trying to make an argument that the authors are not saying. That position is essentially saying that we're predicting crisis and that's good and we're cheering for it and whatever. No. This is just a lens to view how humans respond to their environment. It is a symbiotic thing, right? And maybe we can wrap on this. Like there's a symbiosis between the history and the generations we touched on. We were all forged in a certain time period, so we are a cohort that then responds predictably in the future. Technology is the exact same way. And so I like to view the world through a complexity lens, through an ecology lens. And I think that's the right way to think about this type of work, right? I'll pull in technology, for example. History is a constant cycle of humans who build tools, creating a new technology. That new technology, let's say it's fire. Everyone has fire now. What does that do? Well, we can stay up late. We can hunt large animals. We can protect ourselves. We got to commune around the fire. We can unlock new food sources, right? Unlocking new food sources literally changes our physical body. We don't have to eat as many plants. Our gut shrinks, our brain increases, right? So that fire technology also changes humans. And then humans are a new form of humans, and we can go on and create new technologies. Those technologies impact us. And so it is that cyclical force between technology and individuals in the same way in generations in history. And so I think I would like to leave people with just think about these cycles. This is innate to the complex world we're in. And in modern times, we like to think about this linear past going to this prosperous future. It's just a straight line, get a little better, 2% each year, blah, blah, blah. That is not how the world works. I think that error is a function of short-term thinking. It's thinking on a human lifespan rather than looking at history and looking at the broad view. And so I would just say cycles are natural, observe them everywhere. And you might be surprised that the world makes more sense. And the world is also more complex than we might like to believe.
Dude, for me, it's really easy. And yeah, look, I can understand the whole doom porn thing. But look, just look at what's happening. Just look at the world around you. Look at the decay of society. Look at the apathy. Look at the nihilism. Look at the extremes in politics. Yeah, there's maybe some setups that are different to the previous cycle or cycles. As you said, there's debt now, there isn't, but we are in a long-term debt cycle as well. But it's all the signals are there. If you go and there's that kind of 4-quadrant graphic that highlights the 4 stages of the fourth turn and what's happening. You can literally plot everything that's been happening this certainly last 5 to 10 years into that quadrant. And so, I mean, what do they say about history? It doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Here we go.
That's right. And before we break, I got to do my duty here and
do your swan thing.
Do a quick swan shill. Yeah.
Sorry.
This is for me too, to be fair. I was employee 4-ish, joined in December 2019. So it's been a wild ride there. And I put a lot of myself into this thing, a lot of sacrifices into this thing. And I'm proud to say that we're building something special here. Company has grown a long way. We've doubled headcount 3 years in a row. Probably won't do that again this year. Revenues are up. The mining business is crushing. We've added, obviously we have a brokerage and, go buy Bitcoin at swan.com or through the app or whatever. We've also added the retirement products so you can get tax advantage Bitcoin. We just launched a custody solution. So you can do a 2 of 3 collaborative custody. We believe it's the easiest way to onboard in this way. And so we're trying to push more and more self-custody and making it as easy as possible. That one probably appeals to you, Peter, and your history there.
Bro, I know my ex-pubs now.
There you go. Anyways, Swan's a financial services company. It's going well. You got a high net worth division. You can You can come get some fancy advice, fancy research, a one-on-one rep, etc. And so, yeah, if you're interested in buying Bitcoin, come check us out. That's probably enough on the Swan Shill. And
dude, you're a sponsor now. You don't have to do the shill anymore.
That's true. That's true.
You're in there. Right, I'm going to see you.
Out of my own voice, and hope to see you at Pacific Bitcoin, huh?
I'm going to see you in Nashville, no?
Oh, I'll see you in Nashville for sure.
I mean, you'll definitely see you at Pacific, but I'll see you in Nashville. I think I've just accepted an invite to your event. There's an event. Private party. Yeah.
Nice.
Me and Danny are going to come along.
Beautiful. Sorry to the listeners who may not attend that.
Yeah, you're going to miss out. Sorry. Brandon, love it. Thank you for doing this. Appreciate you, man.
Thank you, Peter.